Thank you for inviting me. So yeah, feel free to ask questions during the talk. And we don't need to go over everything. But yeah, it'll be great if we can be interactive. So this is I'm gonna be talking about this work about decentralized exchanges and how you can make them more fair. And I'm gonna introduce like the challenge and like some solutions that we have thought about it. Um, so, is working. Yes. So the initial motivation for this work is, I mean, more broadly speaking, so we are interested on when you design mechanisms on strategic behavior in mechanisms. The classic setting that we are thinking that economists think about, or more broadly between economics and computation, is this problem. Okay, we have an auction. People are going to bid on this auction, but they're going to be strategic about their behavior. What I'm going to talk about, though, is the fact that also platforms or the person running your mechanism can also be strategic. One example where there has happened and got a lot of attention was this case against Google, where Google was accused of manipulating their auctions by taking advantage of their monopoly power that they had in the advertising market. So as you see in this code, they would say Google manipulate auctions across several of their products to isolate Google from competition in the market. Let me give you a quick example of how could something like that takes place when your Google was implementing their auctions. So the initial problem is that when you are a publisher like New York Times and you want to monetize your web page, you're going to auction ads on your page. But the way that happens is you're going to go to a company called DoubleClick for Publishers, which was a company acquired by Google around 2008. DoubleClick is going to run an auction, but they're going to receive bids on this auction from many different ad exchanges. And the ad exchange is going to receive bids, for example, from Pepsi or Coca-Cola. So let's say Google is receiving a bid from Coca-Cola to show an ad on the publisher, which is New York Times. And Pepsi is bidding in a competing exchange. What Google would do is that they would wait for the competition to bid, and then they would share that information with their ad exchange, and just then they would decide which bid they would send to their auction. And this was a strategy called the last look advantage. So Google would give itself a last look advantage on the competition before deciding how to bid. So that's just an example of one of the strategies that Google could do, just because now they were not only the auctioneer, but they also were one of the ad exchanges on this market. So this brings me to my research question, which is how can we design algorithms when the person who's going to be implementing our algorithm is someone that's also economically motivated, right? And that's particularly relevant in the blockchain context because in the blockchain context, we have these entities called miners, sequencers, who are the ones who are in fact implementing the mechanism we are going to be designing. So there's many ways we can enforce the rules of the game in a mechanism. So in the case against Google, what the regulators are focusing about is regulation, how we could regulate the market to enforce the rules of the game. There includes antitrust, which is the focus of the lawsuit. But I think in computer science and economics, we are also interested in thinking about how could we use different techniques to enforce the rules of the game. So we have things like cryptography, evaluation systems are a very important part in economics to ensure that agents are going to focus on the long term rather than the short term benefits of the games. But in general, here I'm going to focus on how we can really combine these different tools, right? Rather than just focus on one or the other, how we can actually combine these different tools to help us achieve the goal of enforcing honest behavior. So can blockchains enable more trust? That's a great question that we in this community are interested to think about. The initial motivation for blockchains was to challenge the traditional way you would think about digital custody, right? So in the traditional setting, if you have your money, you deposit your money in a bank. And not surprisingly, over the years, many banks have failed, where the banks initially, they promise they're going to return your deposit, but a bank failure is in fact an instance where the bank fails to hold to that promise. And over the years, many of these things happen. In particular, in 2008, during the Great Recession, a lot of during the Great Recession, a lot of banks failed, and not surprised, that was the year where the Bitcoin white paper came around, right? This Bitcoin was promising a new way we could have custody of assets that doesn't not rely on banks. And for this reason, blockchains were emerged as an alternative. What's a blockchain? Now, a blockchain allow you to have custody of your assets that does not require you to give your custody to some third party. In some sense, your assets now is going to be registered in a distributed network, a blockchain network that assigns the ownership of this asset. Okay, why is that? How is that related to the decentralized exchange problem now? Well, once you have custody of your asset, you will want to use it to do something with it. So you need to exchange that asset with some other party. And that's where the exchange problem comes about. So there is traditionally two ways you could exchange digital goods in the blockchain context. You can use a centralized exchange like Binance. These are very similar to how you exchange goods in the traditional finance, right? You're going to give custody of your assets to some third party, for example, Binance. And whenever you want to trade or you want to exchange the asset, you're going to just ask Binance to record that transfer in their book. And now Binance is giving that promise that whenever you want your asset, they can return it back. The problem with that is the low transparency. So FTX was a classic example of a centralized exchange that supposedly was supposed to return your assets, and they were doing things that they were not supposed to do with your assets. For this reason, this community has been very interested on being to hold to the roots of not requiring you to give custody of your assets to some third party. That's where a decentralized exchange comes in, because it allows you to trade your digital assets without requiring you to give custody to a third party. So you have your digital assets stored in your digital wallet, and you can directly exchange your asset in a blockchain contract. The main challenge here, though, which is really the focus on my talk, is that once you have this decentralized environment, it's really hard to enforce the rules of the game, which I'm going to show these market manipulations that we see in these markets in particular. In the community, it's called the MEV problem, and it is really the main challenge on really decentralizing this exchange problem.
So I think like there is kind of maybe a connection between the two, because like when you have a low transparency, it could be that you also have a kind of MEV in the centralized exchange, but there is less aware. But on the other hand, in blockchain, because of the full transparency, it's very easy to see every time that someone cheating.
Yes, that's an advantage of the decentralized exchanges, that it provides more transparency, I would say that although it has high transparency, I think the confusion in the community is that because transparency means is no one is gonna deviate from the protocol, which is not true. Like even though a system is very transparent, which the decentralized exchange is, you can have you can be very far from a fair outcome. Great question. If you have no other questions. So to model the decentralized exchange, so the simplest model I could come up with is the following. So you have transactions coming from traders. You have your transactions are going to a sequencer. It's often called also a block builder, a miner. It's all the same entities. And the sequencer is going to pick the order where transactions are going to execute. That execution ordering, which is the order of the transactions, is going to go to a block proposer, and that proposer is the one who's actually going to execute your trade in the blockchain. So here the proposer is not going to be very relevant. What's really more important is the sequencer and the order of transactions. Now, a model for a decentralized exchange that I'm going to focus on, which is the Uniswap model, is the following. We have a quantity of tokens locked in a contract. So this is the concept product of market maker, where the model is, we're going to say, well, the exchange has a state x1, x2, where xi is the amount of token I locked in the contract. So the contract is going to be used to exchange token I for token 2. So think as you're either buying or selling token 1, and you're either paying in token 2 or you're receiving token 2. And that's going to be the state of the contract. Now, anyone can trade against this contract in the following process. So we're going to define this notion of a potential function on the state. So the potential of this particular exchange is just the product of the liquidity locked in the contract. So this one x1, x2, and anyone can trade against the contract in the following way. If you want to purchase Q units of token 1, so you're subtracting token 1 from the state, so you're withdrawing that. Now the amount of token 2 you're going to pay is going to be some quantity P that ensures that the potential is invariant.
So another comment, not any decentralized exchange, but the AMM like Uniswap, also effectively continuously updates the price. As opposed to centralized exchanges where the price is fixed per block. They're not going to change the price when they execute the trades. The only opportunity they have to update the price will be in the next block. That's also a big difference. Why? I mean, so within a centralized exchange, maybe there's some arbitrage opportunities that are clear to everybody when the price is known, and maybe you do something at the beginning of the block, but it doesn't. The ordering doesn't really matter here. It's continuously.
The order in a sense, in general, even an order book, the order would matter because the order you match the trades.
It's in an order book.
That's
very different.
It's very different model. And I mean, if this audience was more like traditional finance people, I would have to emphasize the difference. There's a very huge difference between this model and like an order book, for example. You have the market microstructure is extremely different.
So unless you step back and make some high-level observations, there is no analogous setting in the traditional finance world to this.
I would say here you could think as this person, the person locking the capital is the counterparty. So in the order book, you can also think about this idea of the counterparty as being the other trader who is providing liquidity in the book, right? So often in the order book, you have this idea of who the transactions are already sitting in the book are the liquidity providers, and they would be the counterparty when a trade arrives, if they happen to cross. So you could think here as the liquidity provider as being the counterparty, where the contract is automatically quoting the price for them, so they're not deciding the price themselves. This function is deciding the price for them. So there is a parallel there. You know. Yeah, so the idea here is you have this trading rule, and then mathematically what we have, you can define this notion of a level set of this potential function, and you always, the trading rule ensures that you always remain on one particular level set of this function. And you can always trade as long as you remain on this level set. I'm ignoring fees here. They're not. So if you're like at state X1, then you can move to another state. And what I want to show here in this picture is the state where your trade executes is very important, right? So for example, if you're at state X1 and you want to purchase Q units of token 1, so you're moving the curve here, but then you have to project back. The projection distance is how much you have to pay. So you're paying this cost here. But if your trade was executing here, your payment's going to be much higher, right? So the order, not the order, but the state where your trade executes is very important, but that implies that the order is going to matter, right? Now, what's the manipulation that people do on these markets? So we have a sequencer, he's sequencing trades. What he can do with very little effort is that if he knows that you want to buy a token, he can buy the token before you, right? And then he executes your buy order. So let's say you want to buy here, then he buys before you, so he moves the curve to the left of the picture, and then he immediately sells the token that he just bought. And you can see he's gonna make a risk-free profit. He makes a profit. There's no risk involved in that. He's always going to make a positive profit for that.
Yes, I think this is kind of the most known sandwich attack. Everyone speaks about this manipulation, right? And do you have another manipulation that is not like sandwich attack, and that you also like?
Yeah, so here we focus on sandwich attacks. One thing about that we're gonna do is that a sandwich attack can be more general in the sense that from one way people could try to hide a sandwich attack is by maybe splitting the trades in many pieces. In some sense, it's still a sandwich attack, but they could try to hide the fact that they are doing sandwich attack by maybe dividing this. From that buy order could be split into many pieces. They could add a few cells in between to hide the fact they're doing it. One thing we are focused on is that our results are not gonna assume the attack is this one. Our results should hold even if he's doing very esoteric things to hide their attack. But in general, in some sense, it's still a sandwich attack. It's just he might be doing weird stuff to hide it. And the NEV, and that's what people call NEV, right? So this is contributing to NEV, is like the part of the value is extracting from these transactions. So in another picture, what does that look like? So I'm often going to use this type of pictures here, where we have the state of the exchange, the initial state. Whenever a buy of Q units execute, you move to the next state. We have the user in blue and dashed, and the sequencer transactions of the user, he's the adversary. So in a sandwich attack, what he does, if there was no attack, don't only your buy execute. If there is an attack, what he buys before you, then he executes your buy, and then he sells, and he takes a cut from that. So here's just an estimate of a conservative estimate by Flashbox, like a company in the market, of how much value has been extracted from this market. So this is from last year, so it's updated. So probably at this point more than $1 billion was extracted from these marketplaces. And how do we know that? How can we quantify that? The reason we can quantify that is because Flashbox runs an auction where in my picture I said there was one sequencer, but everyone wants to sequence trades if they know they can make a profit from that. So there, in fact, many people can be trying to do that sequencing, and they're competing the auction, this MEV Boost auction implemented by Flashbox to decide who gets to sequence trades. And that allows us to measure the value extracted as being part of that profit of that auction, right? So often I'm going to think as one sequencer, but in fact, currently there's many entities competing for being the sequencer on this market. Yeah, currently more than 9% of Ethereum blocks they go through this auction. So it's because of the value that this opportunities create, it kind of centralizes the whole blockchain ecosystem to be forced to participate on this market, right? Because if there is profit to be made, why not? And they just raise a lot of money.
Can you take those the numbers? It's commute, right? But it's total MEV profit, or it's just from Uniswap?
It's total MEV, but when we look at this was majority was coming from Uniswap. There is some from liquidations, but from when we looked at this was more than 90% was.
Part of it is sandwich attacks, and part of it is also arbitrage lights.
Yeah. So what can we do about it, right? So what's wrong here? Okay, so we are trying to design a system to exchange. Let's go back to the goal, right? We created this digital asset. We want people now to be able to exchange it, and we are failing on that, right? And how can we solve this problem? So there's many interesting ideas to solve this problem, and we're still trying to find the answer. It's if I go to a blockchain conference, that's 90% of people is talking about this. So there, one line of research is thinking about, oh, maybe we could design a different mechanism, right? Maybe the design we had for this AMM was not a good one, right? Maybe that's not the right way to do an exchange. So this is something like call swap, where you can match trades and make sure the all transactions clear at the same price. There's a few challenges, like there's a cost for actually proving that you're matching people at the clearing price. I often hear critique is about latency. It often takes longer to get, like takes longer for your trade to clear. So there's a critique I hear, not only in blockchains, also this is our very popular idea in traditional finance, like this paper I'm citing from Buddish was an idea proposed to traditional finance, and even there's a critique about the latency the solutions introduced in trading. Another critique might be about liquidity, in the sense that when you're proposing a new solution, you have to convince the liquidity providers to join your protocol, because in general, you can provide better execution prices if you have liquidity providers in the marketplace you're designing. So this is a really hard problem when you're designing a solution, especially in this context, because your solution might be very good, but if you don't have liquidity providers, the execution price your user might be getting is so bad because there's no liquidity there, and your user might prefer to be sandwiched in the other market because they would still be getting a better price. So I would not underestimate the challenge the network effects that I like an incumbent solution has. So it is really challenging problem to address. Another line of research is this idea of encrypting transactions. We could encrypt the mempool, ensure everything is private. There is a few challenges in some sense there that we still have to figure out, like what if that encrypted transaction might be invalid. So that would be in case of some denial of service attacks, someone hacking your mempool. Introduce additional trust assumptions, but might involve some threshold encryption. So these are additional assumptions that you might need to have. Dalia would be a great person to
or trusted hardware.
Your trusted hardware, yes, yeah.
Yeah, of course. So, how you count L2? L2 is kind of very get closer to the first come first served, right? So you kind of like the second category when people shift from Ethereum to Arbitrum.
L2 would be not, I wouldn't call L2 a solution, it would be just it's like a different chain, you know, like it's like a different trading venue. Yeah.
You will have an ecosystem of builders specializing for the L2.
Yeah, that or oftentimes in L2s, you just have a centralized sequencer, so then you have the third.
Yeah, so it's more, yeah, so that goes to my third. So the third one was when we start thinking about this problem, the third was what really motivated us to think about it. Like when we look on it, it was like, oh, you had this thing called Flashbox Protect, which is basically an entity would be promising to sequence trades in a fair way. I mean, it's very efficient, right? You're just trusting people and like there's no yeah, it's as efficient you could be, right? But the problem there was there was not much transparency, like there was not a clear way you could audit, verify those claims. This was really what we got us interested on this problem, how we could maybe motivated by this idea to improve, like maybe do something better here.
So again, I would underscore without judging or stating an opinion, but in the third category, trusted hardware is a unique category, right? So,
Yeah.
And there are people who would strongly argue that you should trust trusted hardware, and that solves the one.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, no, it's interesting, right? There is I remember this old crypto, I mean, more in theory, there was this people used to talk a lot about this idea of falsifiable assumptions, right? If your assumption is not true, can I prove, right? So this is like, there is a lot of debate on this field. Is like if you have an assumption, can you prove if that happens to not be a true assumption? It happens to be wrong, right? Can you prove? Yeah, that's a challenge there. And what really inspired us here was that, I mean, there's a very strong focus on during the second solution. If you have a threshold encryption, the argument is about decentralization, right? You want to decentralize. And one thing we thought about was, well, it doesn't matter too much if your solution is centralized, as long as I can verify, right? And that's really what we focus on here, because our solution is going to be centralized. You're going to have one sequencer. We're going to give a way you can verify that solution. So our solution, so this was a paper with David Perks at Stock last year. And the idea is we have a customer, right? Someone want to trade. And we have a sequencer that can be malicious. It could be doing weird stuff with the transactions. And you have your blockchain. When the blockchain, I think we already talked about, the blockchain is very transparent. You get to see everything there. It's great. And what our intuition was, oh, maybe we could have the way to also audit the sequencer, right? That we could try to impose some constraints on the sequencer to make it easier to limit their power in the market. And we came up with this idea of a credible decentralized exchange. What's that? So that's basically a sequencer that's constrained to sequence transactions in accordance with what we call verifiable sequencing rule. So the sequencer key can still add and remove trades from the block as long as it does not violate the sequencing. So our main result was that if some party, in particular the sequencer, benefits from having a transaction executed, then the execution price you'd be getting would be at least as good as if your transaction was the only one executing. So this was our main result, was that we showed that there is a way to build a sequencing rule that would satisfy this condition. And when I say executing alone, I really means the benchmark here is if your trade was the only one in the block. So we take that as being a good benchmark for having your transaction executing. Any questions about this? So let me take a step back and advertise this idea of credibility, which I've been really thinking about credibility for a while. And it's more like a broader concept, right? Credibility is this idea of you have your mechanism and you want to ensure that your mechanism is really doing what it promised to do, right? So I got interested in this problem in particular because of this scandal with Google, where Google was essentially using a second price auction where in economics, the second price auction is very loved by everyone because it has this property of being strategy proof. Like if you bid $80 and bought bids 20, then you only pay the minimum would be required to win the auction. So it has this property of being strategy proof in the sense it's in your best interest to bid the maximum. Okay, so this is a very, very nice property of these auctions. But it has a very challenging assumption here is that the auctioneer needs to be trusted. It's very easy for the auctioneer to lie and say, oh, Alice, you should pay 79 because Bob bid 79, because the Alice cannot see what Bob bid, and the auctioneer could be lying about the payment. So this auction is not credible because the auctioneer has a deviation that cannot be detected individually, and it's profitable.
And by the way, also, they collude Alice and Bob White also and manipulate the auction center.
So you're saying that so another problem of second price auctions, the auctioneer might not want the bidders to collude. And in fact, there is some, for instance, the government is using a second price to buy something, they might pass a law saying you're not allowed to collude, for example. But yeah, here I'm more focused on the seller.
Yeah, because it's kind of similar to the blocker.
Yeah, and I think that I think the idea of sellers colluding is as this idea of being a powerful adversary is really more motivated. These auctions are old idea in economics, but I think the challenge nowadays is these auctions are being run over the internet, and it's very hard to know. Anyone can just be running an auction, and it's very hard to know if they are really doing what they are promising to do. I mean, they're very powerful concepts of being strategy proof, but it's very hard for even the auction, even if you're honest auctioneer, it's not easy for you to prove you're not doing weird stuff. And that was one reason why Google decided to move away from second price auctions was people were very suspicious of Google because of their strategy they were doing. And then they reached a point where people just not trust them. Like there was this very big suspicion, and there was not an obvious way Google could even prove to them, to the community, they were not doing weird things.
Just to click on when you say, because I think there's, well, let's say, even inside Google, there should be multiple departments, right?
Yeah.
And then basically, isn't the idea that they need a
And what?
Which-
Firewall?
Firewalls. That basically that says the two departments should not talk to each other, thus whatever strategy, whatever code you're receiving, I'm not passing through to our.
Yeah, I don't know if they do that.
I
That'll be
imagine that will be
interesting,
their arguments towards the lawsuit. Is that we have this separation, that's why we're not doing.
I don't know if they have that. I mean, it's been very interesting lawsuit to read. I mean, it's a bit long, but there was a lot of the government had to interview a lot of employers, ex-employers. It's not like they build a lot of evidence and it's not really. I mean, yeah, how you get evidence to that without actually talking to someone who used to work there. It's not easy. But yeah, I don't know exactly how Google is defending against that. It's gonna be interesting to see what comes out of it. Yeah, so there just in some work I've done on credible auctions. So there was this very influential work by Mohammed Akbarpour in Stanford and Sheng Li at Harvard. They showed that in general, if you want to have credibility, which is like if the auctioneer does not benefit from manipulating, and you want to have strategy proof, which was that strategy proof often is a good user experience, right? It's very easy for you to decide how you should participate in the auction. So they say, oh, if you want to have strategy proven and credibility, they showed the only way you could do it was at the ascending price auction, which is a very expensive auction to implement, especially over the internet, because it's an auction where it requires a lot of communication between the auctioneer with bidders. So for some applications, that could be as an impossibility to resolve. Like you could not have both properties. And we show a line of work that you can actually avoid this with very, very simple cryptographic primitives like commitment schemes. And I would say here the crypto is not the hard part, it's more like the game theoretical analysis of the game. The cryptography is very standard, like this. But yeah, so this is just a backdrop, say credibility. Anything you design, you can ask this question: is your protocol credible, right? Especially in the blockchain context. A lot of people design a protocol, they are very worried about manipulation in their protocol. So this is related to credibility, how you can ensure your protocol is robust to manipulation from someone. So going back to the exchange problem, so what's the sequencing rule, which I said was the main ingredient of this work? Let me first give you a model. So in general, what we're going to say, we have, I already told you what the AMM model is. So we have so the AMM model is more general. We have I showed the constant product rule, but in general, you can have a formal definition of what the AMM can be. For trading, users, they're either going to trade by using buy or sell orders, which is basically specifying how much they want to get or receive, and the maximum they're willing to pay, or the minimum they're willing to receive. I'm going to assume for this talk the constant product rule, but it's more general. Yeah, for those interested, basically any quasi-concave increase in potential function would give you a reasonable AMM. For the rule, we have the following formalism for the rule. So what's the rule? So we have the initial state of the exchange. We have the set of transactions we want to sequence. In a sequence rule is just a function S that contains a non-empty collection of orderings of this set of transactions. And it should satisfy the following property. It should be efficient in the sense that there should be an efficient algorithm that allow you to compute one of those orderings. And it should be verifiable, which means that for every state X and every potential output that someone gives you, you should be able to check if it belongs to that collection or not. So that's related to the verifiable part I mentioned. It's centralized, but it should be verified.
So can I ask a question? First, like in terms of efficiency, so it's, I'm not really familiar with computer science language, but it's mean like even if you have a block of 100 transactions, it will be.
Oh, so yeah, so often when we say polynomial time, we respect the input. So in particular, the algorithm I'm gonna give you is linear on the number of transactions.
I was gonna say, the verification runs on chain, so that should be more efficient than the computation.
The verification is so it's interesting. So there is, I think that that's a bit on how you would implement this algorithm. You could actually have no, you could require a verification on chain, which would be linear, or what some people do with this idea of optimistic, right?
Yeah.
You assume,
You could go through
yeah,
a roll.
yeah, and you allow someone to challenge, and you only pay the cost of running another.
I mean, any acceleration or the deferral of computation, any technique, any layer, so it could be an optimistic rollup, it could be a zero knowledge rollup, it doesn't matter, you can always defer the computation.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, it is something that's
But yeah,
it's contractual, you know, it's done by the smart contract.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
very clever.
Yeah, so maybe like in terms of in economics, I just want to say it again. You can verify the order before finally executing the transaction, or you can do it after and then punish the.
Yeah.
This is kind of the two different options.
yeah.
Yeah, no,
Yeah, you can either do one or the other, but you can.
yeah, but
But because the other is kind of, you still have some little bit risk, like optimistic collapse, that someone can manipulate, but maybe if you do it correctly, there is no incentive to manipulate, because then they will kick you out from validation.
I mean, you can require them to deposit a bond or something.
I don't know that it matters that much.
Yeah, it
It's
doesn't.
optimistic.
Yeah.
No, I'm just asking from curiosity to.
So before I show you the rule, let me. I kind of gave you a result, right? I gave you what the main claim was, but let me tell you why my claim was not this, that we can achieve this stronger notion of security. This is strong in the sense we are saying a rule would be MEV proof if there is no state and no set of transactions that would allow the sequencer to obtain a risk-free profit from by some execution order in T. So this is a stronger notion of security, where this is saying, well, there's no way that there's a rule satisfies property, there's no way that the sequencer could be getting a risk-free profit. It means that he's getting some amount of token one and not paying anything for that. Or maybe he's getting both token one and token two, but he's never getting he's never losing anything on the other token. Look confused.
So just define what is a profit, any profit?
But yeah, profit, I mean, risk-free profit, I mean, you're getting 1 unit of token one, but your risk-free means you're not paying anything for that token one you got. Which a sandwich attack is a risk-free attack, because you're getting from token one, but you're not paying anything for that token after all the transactions execute.
You may pay intermediately within the
Yeah.
month, but
Yeah,
once it's settled.
Yeah, intermittently you might be paying something, but once you add up everything, you're not losing, you're not paying anything. So there, one claim we have in this paper is that it's actually impossible to have this notion of security. You cannot have an MEV proof sequencing rule for, in particular for the swap model.
That was why it puzzled me, it seemed too strong.
Yeah. So their counterexample is very simple. It's actually you assume an instance with 3 identical bytes, 3 identical cells. And what you do is like a mental game where you imagine there is an ordering that the rule would allow, and then I'm gonna say, okay, 3 of I think one of the bytes are gonna be from the attacker. No, yeah, one of the bytes from the sequencer and 2 cells is from the sequencer. And what you do, okay, initially you pick any ordering, you say, oh, is there a way to assign 1 byte and 2 cells to the attacker where he's got a risk-free profit? And you basically enumerate every possible ordering, and you say, yes, for every single ordering, there's a way to do it. And that's the impossibility. So
Why did you do 3? Seems like 2 and 2. That also big now? Why is it there's always gonna be a switching?
maybe there's
That is what.
I don't think it's publishable.
Maybe also you want to show that the attacker can manipulate it, that it's not really very easy to see that it's the classical sandwich that you have by
Again.
So you want to kind of make it that it's not going to be like the obvious sandwich attack that you see like buy, sell, that it's very easy to.
No, here's just, I just want to prove the impossibility. I don't care. Are you saying that this is not a trivial? Yeah, this is not a trivial, not the sandwich attack you would see in often people mention, but it is a risk-free profit. Yeah. Now let me give you the main. So I have until 11 up to okay, let me now give the algorithm. And I promise it's very simple. Very simple. So recall what the sequence rule is gonna take is the initial state of the exchange and the set of transactions that you want to sequence. We're in partitioning 2 groups, the set of bytes, the set of cells. And the output is the execution ordering, which initially is gonna be empty. And I'm gonna give you like a greedy algorithm to construct T. The first part of the algorithm does the following. So while we still have bytes and cells that we have not sequenced, so the sets are not empty, what we're gonna do is now observe that, let me recall a bit of notation here. So let xt be the state of the AMM after the first T transactions in this T. Initially T is empty, but let's say now T is not empty, and you simulate what the state of the AMM would be after all the transactions in T they have sequence already execute. And if the amount of token 1 in that state is bigger or equal than the amount of token 1 in the beginning of the block, so x0 was the initial state, the amount of token 1, and xt, 1 is the amount of token 1 after all transactions in capital T execute. But if the amount of token 1 is bigger than it currently is bigger than it was in the beginning, one property that every reasonable AMM should have is that because the supply of token 1 is higher, token 1 is gonna be cheaper than it was in the beginning of the block. What does that mean is that every buy order that executes at this phase would be very happy to do that when compared with the initial block. Then what the rule says, well, pick any buy order because they will be happy, pick any of them and sequence them on the block to be the next one. Otherwise, that amount of token 1 is smaller, which means now sell orders actually would be happier to execute this phase, then it would be 5 groups. And you sequence any cell. The second option now is, well, we might reach a point where you don't have bias, you only have bias for cells left. So you sequence out the other side of the market, you only have the other side left. What the rule says, you can sequence the remaining transactions in any way. So an example, so this is the example for the impossibility, right? Free buys, free sells, what the rules say. Well, in the beginning, you can pick any buying. Then at this point, you can only pick sells because you still have buying and sells. Then you can only pick sells. Then you have to pick a buying. Then you have to pick a sell. At this point, the rule says, oh, if you are here, then you should pick a buy. So you should pick a sell, but you only have one buy left. So you can now have to pick a buy.
That's a question. So here we use X01 as the entry.
Yeah.
And that's the price of like.
Yeah.
If we imagine that this block is going to be a process of price discovery, then at the end, whatever that will be next.
Yeah.
Why don't we use that as the entry?
Because
In this block.
That's a good question. That's because they're I don't have the right answer, but one nice property of using the initial price is that if the initial price is harder to manipulate, because if the initial price was manipulated, the adversary has to hold some inventory, like you're manipulating that price by picking the initial state in the previous block. But if the blockchain is highly decentralized, then he doesn't know he's going to create the next block.
And manipulate. But another way to think about it is that when you send your transaction, you see this is the state of the world, so this is your expected exchange.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I don't say it's not going to work. I don't say it. There's space for it.
Also, the computer science section would be, that will explode.
Yeah, you're
Your prediction very quickly.
yeah, the design will be more complicated. So why does that remove sandwich attacks? So to recall the sandwich attack, you have the user when a buy is being sandwiched by a buy and a sell. Well, this is not a valid ordering. So you actually, if the sequence of promise to use that algorithm, you can actually see is deviating from the algorithm. Why? Because if the attacker tries to buy token 1, then the rules say that the next transaction must be a sell, because you still have buys and sells to sequence. It cannot be another buying. So the rules say if the attacker tries to send to buying, then he'll be immediately forced to sell the tokens he just bought. And just then would the user buy order execute. In fact, only the following orderings are valid, and you can see that none of them would allow the attacker to get a profit. In fact, if there is a single user transaction in the block, there is no way the attacker can get. So they recall the MEV proof point definition I had. If you have a single user transaction, the rule is in fact MEV proof if you have a single user transaction, but not if you have more than one user transaction. And this is one example of that. So now let me give you the main claim. I almost gave you the whole proof on when I was describing the algorithm. What we said was when so now for the proof, let's say we have this particular ordering that's an output from the algorithm. And what we do is divide into groups. One we call the core, the other we call the tail, where the core are the transactions that were sequenced in the first phase of the algorithm where we still have buys and sells to sequence. And what we show there is that all transactions being sequenced at this phase, they are happy. They're getting a good price relative to the benchmark. The hard part though is the well, not hard, but what we should observe is what happened to the tail, right? The transactions in the tail, which are transactions that are executing in the second part of the algorithm, they might be getting a worse price. But now the observation is that the attacker is indifferent about them executing. He doesn't care if those trades execute. Why is that? Well, because the first observation is that the attacker would, if he has power of sequencing transactions, he would never pick a ordering where his buy order is executing after a user. He would rather he have his buy orders execute first because the price would only be better. Therefore, you only have to you might as well assume that all his transactions execute first, and any user transaction who is in the tail only executes after the attacker transaction. But if this is true, then the attacker does not benefit from these trades being blocked, right? Because if the attacker is not executing any transaction after those transactions in blue, there's no profit he can be making from those transactions. So that's the second part. The sequencing does not gain by including A in the block. It means that if these transactions were not in the block, you would be getting the same payoff. And this rule is verifiable. That's just by the observers. You can just replay and you can see the algorithm. So I said the rule was not MEV proven, and let me just go back quickly to the impossibility example. So this is a valid ordering for that impossibility, and here in this ordering that satisfies the sequencing rule, the greatest rule that I show you. And here the attacker is making a risk-free profit because on average, the sell orders are getting a better price than the price he paid for the buying. So here on average, he's actually making a profit from these trades. But the users are not, but now let's look at what happens to the users. So this user is getting a good price, before is getting a good price. As free is getting an even better price than he'd be getting if he was the only one in the block. B6 is the only one getting a worse price, but B6 is the last transaction to execute, and the attacker does not gain from B6 executing.
Suppose it's 50 years, why would an attacker buy and immediately sell half?
But yeah, this is just showing that he's getting a risk-free profit. He's not, yeah, okay, so he's, but he's just showing that he's getting a risk-free profit. It might seem weird, but he's still getting a risk-free profit from that.
If the order of S3 and S2, then he's not getting a profit.
Say again?
If the order of S3 and S2, but
Yeah,
then B1 will be exactly equal to S2 plus S5.
yeah, he'll be, yeah, so if there's those switches, he'll not be getting a profit, but the point is that the rule doesn't know which trades are coming from the attacker or not, right? Like if we swap S3 with the claim is more about there is a ordering that satisfies the rule where he's getting a risky profit. It's not about there's no, like there is our ordering where he's not getting a profit, because the point is that the algorithm cannot know which trades are coming from the attacker. So here I'm assuming there's no notion of identity, like just have no idea who these people are.
But wouldn't this introduce risk then?
In which way?
Because for the attacker, now there is a risk that S2 and S3 would actually flip. And
But the attacker is the one sequencing the trades.
Yeah.
Got it.
So this is there is the kind of forward paper that everyone is happy with the sequencing. So basically, there's going to be a transition from sandwich attacks to kind of something that the MEV will always do, that it will do a buy or sell transaction that push the price away, and then it will do a transaction in the other direction to get the good price, and we will end up by kind of in blocks that we're always going to have users deviate from execution price, MEV get a good price, and then like, kind of, so what do you think about this environment?
Well, let's talk about it. I wonder.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Because I have to picture that.
Okay.
Finish. Yeah, just to conclude. Yeah, so in this talk I wanted to kind of show you that the blockchain provides transparency, but that does not mean that your protocol is going to be secure if you're not careful. You can audit the smart contract, but the challenge here is that you really can. The problem is the manipulation is happening on the input, right? It's really challenging when the input of the algorithm can influence the outcome, and that's where the challenge is. So here the idea was to introduce some auditability in the contract itself by limiting the ordering of trades. And I think one interesting implication is that is a centralized solution where a sequencer could be bad in their reputation. Either if you enforce the rule on contract, or people can basically see who's following the rules or not. I think the idea of reputation in blockchain has not been much explored. I think this would be a very interesting idea just to think about. In some sense, flashbots like relays, relays, flashbots protects rely a lot. There is essentially reputation systems, which is very interesting, right? The fact that the blocks are public to the relay, and you trust that they are not leaking information. So there's already a use of reputation, maybe not for a good cause, but there's already interesting things there. So open questions. Credibility, as I want to convey, is a broader concept. You can think about any mechanism design question. One comment about our security claim really rely on this kind of duality property that in every state either buys or sells again a better price relative to the initial state. That's what allows us to have a rule like that. That fails if you have a more interesting AMM, like just free token pools. You cannot have this duality property anymore. In the question, what can you do there? Credibility in other markets. Order books are interesting because now you have your counterparty are other users, not the contract itself. And that makes I thought order books would actually be easier to extend these ideas, but I realize it's actually more challenging because your other traders, your counterparty, and you cannot know which traders are attackers or not. My intuition was that order books would be easier to make some, like if you have a fairness guarantee, how you can fairly match trades. I thought was easier for some reason, and I realized it's not. I think interesting questions if DeFi can have the same standards of security as traditional finance. I think that's the challenge on this field. But I think there's also things that DeFi could maybe in the future help on traditional finance. the idea of transparent execution, that would be powerful for even like traditional finance, if we can solve these problems and show how we can actually have a very transparent market. So I think there's a lot of potential for DeFi to show how we could do things in a more transparent way. Even in traditional finance, there's a lot of discussions about selling order flows, things like that. So there is also problems there about fairness, and I think DeFi could not only be in this. I think we are currently in this stage where we are like figuring out how to do things, but maybe we could also teach things to traditional finance. Thank you very much, and thank you for the questions. If you have more questions.